I knew something was off the moment I saw the folding chairs. It was a Saturday morning, the sky was clear, and I was heading out back to start prepping the lower field for hay baling. I leased the field behind my house to a local farmer. It's part of my property line, backed by an old wooden fence and a steel gate with a padlock I installed myself. But today I found the gate wide open and about 30 pastel-colored chairs scattered across the grass like some overgrown kindergarten party, and there she was. Wanda McClain, HOA president, full-time busybody, part-time tyrant. She stood in the center of the field like she personally discovered it, wearing a wide-brimmed hat and barking orders at a couple of teenagers who were setting up folding tables. I parked my ATV and walked toward her, trying to stay calm. "Wanda," I said, "what the hell is going on here?" She turned, clutching a clipboard like it gave her presidential authority. "Oh, Everett, perfect timing. We're setting up for the HOA's spring picnic. Isn't it lovely?" "Lovely," I pointed to the gate. "This is my field." "You cut the lock." She blinked innocently, like I just told her the sky was green. "We needed space. The community park is being reseeded and your field was just sitting here doing nothing, because it's private property." She waved her hand like I was being dramatic. The HOA voted. "It's temporary, we'll be done by evening." "You don't get to vote on my land," I snapped. "You broke in." Wanda didn't even flinch. "Everett, you've always been so touchy. Look around, everyone's having fun. Don't be that guy." I stared at her in disbelief. "You forced your way onto my property and now you're gaslighting me while trespassing." She started walking toward the buffet table being set up. "It's really not a big deal. And frankly, you should be grateful. This picnic is for the community." I turned and stormed back to my ATV. I could see the hay tractor from the distance, stalled out, waiting. I couldn't let this go. Not again. Last fall, Wanda tried to fine me for unauthorized fence color, even though the fence had been that exact shade of brown since before she moved in, and now she was just casually stealing land. I made one call, not to the HOA. Not to a neighbor. I called the police. When the squad car pulled up 20 minutes later, Wanda was mid-speech with a plastic cup in one hand and a megaphone in the other. The look on her face when she saw the officer stepping onto the field was worth every ounce of frustration. "Ma'am," the officer said, walking up to her, "are you aware this is private property?" Wanda's smile tightened. "This is community land." I stepped forward. "I've got the deed in my house." "I'll grab it," the officer nodded. "Please, and ma'am, I'm going to need everyone off this field until we verify ownership." Wanda's jaw clenched, her voice rising. "This is a sanctioned HOA event. Doesn't matter," the officer said. "If you're not permitted by the property owner, this is trespassing." I could see the cracks forming in her plastic picnic-perfect persona. She looked around, realizing the neighbors were watching. Some were already packing up their chairs. I headed back to the house, heart pounding, knowing this wasn't over. Not with Wanda. She just made it personal, and I was ready to make it legal. I was on the porch by the time the officer finished clearing the field. From where I stood, I could see Wanda pacing near the buffet table, her face stiff with an expression I hadn't seen before calculation. This wasn't just about the picnic anymore. She was scanning the situation like a chessboard, already plotting her next move. The neighbors were dispersing, some looking confused, others annoyed. A few avoided eye contact altogether. I handed the officer the deed still in its protective sleeve. He glanced over it, nodded, and said, "Crystal clear. This land belongs to you." "They're not coming back here without permission." "Appreciate it," I said. "Do I need to file a report?" "I already started one," he replied. "And you should consider reinforcing that gate. Cutting a lock is property damage. If you want to press charges, we've got enough here." That gave me pause. I wasn't sure if I was ready to take it that far yet, but I sure wasn't letting it slide. That evening, I replaced the padlock with a hardened steel one, the kind used for storage units. I also installed a trail cam on the oak tree that overlooked the gate, infrared motion-triggered, time-stamped. If Wanda or any of her clipboard-wielding disciples came near my fence again, I'd have a crystal-clear photo to go with the police report. Around 9, I was inside feeding the dogs when my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, it buzzed again, this time a text from my neighbor Arjun, who lived across the street. "Wanda's on your driveway. She's not alone." I stepped out onto the porch, flashlight in hand. Sure enough, there she was wearing a windbreaker now, flanked by two HOA board members. Frank Dillard, who ran a pest control business, and Tracy Lynn, who sold essential oils out of her garage. "Evening," I called out. Wanda turned, her voice sharp. "Everett, we need to talk." "Not on my property," I said flatly. "I'm not interested in another ambush." She took one step forward, chin lifted. "We're here to inform you that the board has issued a temporary easement for community use of the southern lot. It's valid for 72 hours. You're out of compliance if you obstruct it." I stared at her, stunned. "An easement? You don't have the legal authority to grant that. This isn't common land. It's attached to my parcel." Frank crossed his arms. "We had a unanimous board vote." "It's in writing." I walked down the steps slowly, keeping my flashlight aimed low. "Let me make this real simple. What you're doing is trying to fabricate a legal right that doesn't exist, and if you step on that field again, I'll have you cited for trespassing. You already committed property damage. You're walking on thin ice." Wanda's smile didn't reach her eyes. "You're being unreasonable. We're trying to serve the neighborhood." "You're trying to bulldoze it," I snapped back. "And you picked the wrong guy to do it to." They left without another word, but not before Tracy muttered something about selfish land hoarders. I stayed outside a while longer, watching the gate from my porch like a hawk. I didn't trust them not to try something overnight. The next morning, I filed an official complaint at the county clerk's office. I brought copies of the property deed, photos of the cut lock, and the police incident number. The clerk, a short woman with reading glasses and a no-nonsense attitude, glanced through the packet and said, "You might want to contact a land use attorney. If your HOA is forging easements, that crosses into criminal territory." That word stuck with me all day, forging. By Tuesday, I had a meeting with a lawyer named Meredith Shaw. She looked over everything, flipping through the pages with the kind of focus that told me she'd seen worse, but not by much. "They don't have the authority to grant easements on privately owned lots," she said. "That's a legal fiction. If they presented that document to anyone, especially while accessing your land, that's fraud. And if 3 board members were involved, that's conspiracy." "So what are we looking at?" I asked. She leaned back in her chair. "You've got criminal mischief from the cut lock, trespassing. Possibly forgery, depending on how they drafted that easement. And if they used HOA funds to print or distribute it, that's misuse of community assets. You could press charges, file a civil suit, or both." I didn't answer right away. I was still wrapping my head around just how far they'd gone. What started as a picnic had turned into a full-blown power grab. That night, I called a few neighbors I trusted. Arjun, Dana from 3 doors down, and a guy named Leo who ran a landscaping business and had tangled with the HOA before over his work trucks. I laid out what happened, what I'd found out, and what I intended to do next. Dana was the first to speak. "I knew she was shady, but she's nuts." Leo ran a hand through his beard. "They tried to fine me $600 last year for having mulch bags in my driveway. I say burn it down. Legally, I mean. I told them I was going to file charges, but I also had another idea, something that would hit Wanda harder than a court summons. HOA elections are in 2 months, I said. What if we organize our own slate of candidates? People who actually want to serve the neighborhood, not rule it." They were in before I could finish the sentence. The next morning, I filed charges at the sheriff's office. The deputy took my statement, copied the documents, and said they'd be opening an investigation. I didn't need to press them. The forged easement was enough bait. Apparently, Wanda had already submitted it to the HOA's legal archive, claiming it had been notarized. That was a mistake. By Friday, the sheriff's office had visited her house. She tried to play it off, but they had a warrant to seize HOA records. My trail cam had caught Frank and Tracy returning to the gate that Wednesday night, caught them holding bolt cutters before they noticed the red light on the camera and bolted. I handed over the footage. The picnic fiasco had cracked the dam. The forged document was the flood and the neighborhood. They were starting to wake up. By the following Monday morning, word had spread. Wanda's easement stunt, as people were calling it, had taken on a life of its own, whispered about on sidewalks and muttered over hedges. What had been a tightly controlled HOA regime was unraveling. And judging by the cold stares she was getting at the community mailbox, Wanda knew it. But I wasn't done. That afternoon, I received a call from Deputy Laird. His tone was more serious this time, stripped of the mild amusement he'd carried during our first talk. "Mr. Dawson," he said, "we've got something you're going to want to see." At the station, he laid out a series of scanned documents across a plastic table. There were signatures, dates. One form bore the words Temporary Community Access Agreement in bold lettering. It was formatted to look official, with a fake seal at the bottom one that matched a notary stamp registered to a woman named Bethany Quinn. I didn't recognize the name. "She's a mobile notary," Deputy Laird explained. "Except she didn't authorize this. We contacted her this morning. She says she's never notarized anything for the HOA in her life, never even been to this zip code." My stomach turned. "She's filing a fraud report," he continued. "If this document was used to justify any kind of action by the HOA, that's criminal forgery." And it gets worse. He handed me another paper, this one a bank statement labeled Community Development Fund. It wasn't a full account summary, just a partial record, obtained under subpoena. But it showed a payment of $475 to a company called Greenridge Events, LLC. The memo line read, "Field rental for spring picnic." "They paid a third-party vendor," I said slowly, "to rent land they didn't own." "Exactly. And it looks like Greenridge is owned by a relative of a board member. We're digging into it." I left the station shaking with anger and a strange, mounting satisfaction. This wasn't just arrogance or overreach anymore. This was fraud, conflict of interest, and embezzlement. They'd not only lied, they'd used community funds to do it. The next evening, I hosted a quiet gathering in my garage, the doors half shut to avoid drawing attention. Arjun, Dana, Leo, and 3 other neighbors I trusted sat on folding chairs around a workbench while I laid everything out. The evidence, the accounts, the forged notary stamp, the payment trail. Dana leaned forward, eyes wide. They used HOA money to pay a fake rental company owned by one of their own. "Looks that way," I said, "and the sheriff's office is still digging. If they find that this was planned by multiple board members, it could trigger state-level charges." Leo cracked his knuckles. "So what's our next move?" "We build a case for community takeover," I said. "We run for the board as a block. We expose the corruption at the next general meeting. But we do it by the book with every document in hand." Arjun tapped the table. "We're going to need signatures, a petition to call a special session. The bylaws allow it." "I've already started drafting it," I said. 2 days later, the first flyer hit mailboxes. It wasn't flashy, just a typed sheet with the header Community Oversight Initiative and a list of grievances. Unauthorized use of private property, falsified documents, misuse of funds. Below that, a schedule of petition tables set up at various driveways throughout the week. By Friday, nearly half the neighborhood had signed. People I barely knew were showing up at my gate to ask, "Is it true? And what else have they done?" It was like a dam had burst, and everyone who'd put up with petty fines, arbitrary rules, and Wanda's condescension for years was finally ready to push back. But the real shift came when someone slipped a manila envelope into my mailbox. No return name. Inside were copies of emails, printed screenshots between Wanda and 2 board members. Not just about the picnic, but about strategic enforcement zones, a term they used to target homeowners they didn't like. They'd been selectively enforcing violations against people who hadn't voted for them in the last election, things like grass height, fence maintenance, and even mailbox colors. They weren't just overstepping, they were retaliating. I brought the envelope straight to Meredith Shaw, my attorney. She examined it carefully, then looked up at me with a grim expression. "This isn't just HOA misconduct, this is civil rights territory. Retaliatory enforcement is illegal, especially if they're selectively targeting residents for personal reasons. If we can link this to fines or citations, we can file a class action. Let's draft it." By the next week, the sheriff's office had frozen the HOA's discretionary account. A court order barred the board from making any non-essential expenditures until the investigation concluded. Wanda, Frank, and Tracy were subpoenaed to testify before the county's fraud examiner. The day the subpoenas were delivered, Wanda tried to hold an emergency board meeting in her driveway. Only 3 people showed up. 2 of them were there to tell her off. The third was a teenager on a skateboard who asked if she was gonna get arrested. She didn't answer. Meanwhile, our petition reached the required threshold and the county clerk approved a special HOA election. It was scheduled for 4 weeks out. We ran 5 candidates, every one of them a resident who'd been harassed, fined, or ignored. Dana for treasurer, Arjun for VP, Leo for grounds management. I ran for president. The campaign wasn't flashy, but it was real. We walked door to door, not with glossy flyers, but with copies of the subpoena. The fake easement, the notary's fraud report, and the bank statement showing the payment to Greenridge Events. The more we showed people, the more they opened up. One man revealed that Tracy had threatened to fine him for excessive garage noise after he declined to vote for her husband. Another woman said Frank had tried to force her to hire his company for pest control after citing her for rodent activity with no inspection. We compiled it all. Meredith organized it into a formal case file. And 2 days before the election, we held a public meeting at the local library. What happened there changed everything. Over 70 residents packed into the room. Meredith presented our findings with hard, quiet precision. She laid out a timeline, showed the forged document, then opened the floor to testimony. One by one, residents came forward, some read statements, others just told their stories. There were tears, there was anger, but most of all, there was resolve. When the floor closed, I stood up and said, "We're not just voting for board members. We're voting for the kind of neighborhood we want to live in, one where rules apply to everyone and no one gets to rule by fear." Election day came. The turnout was the highest in the HOA's history. Wanda's slate didn't just lose, they were dismantled. Not a single one of them broke 15% of the vote. We won in a landslide. The next morning, I walked the field behind my house. The grass was tall again, the gate locked, the trail cam still recording. The sun was rising over the ridge, casting long shadows across the hill. Wanda's house was quiet. Her yard was empty, her clipboard nowhere in sight, but I wasn't interested in revenge. We had work to do, rebuilding trust, revising bylaws, reviewing every dollar the HOA had spent over the last 3 years. Transparency was the new law of the land, and the field, it stayed private. Just the way it was meant to be. 2 weeks after the election, the sheriff's office contacted me again. This time, it wasn't just about Wanda or the fake easement. Detective Allison Herrera, a state investigator working with the district attorney's office, asked if I could come downtown to go over some new findings from the HOA's seized devices. I arrived at the County Justice Center expecting updates on the same financial issues. What I got instead was something else entirely. "Mr. Dawson," Herrera began, clicking through a digital folder on a government issue monitor. "We've been combing through emails, text messages, and internal notes from the devices turned over during the investigation. What we've uncovered goes far beyond misuse of funds or document fabrication." She pulled up a PDF, an internal HOA memo dated 6 months prior. "Take a look at this." The header read, "Field reallocation proposal, internal draft only." It outlined a plan to file a fraudulent claim with the county assessor's office to reclassify my field as community open space by exploiting an outdated zoning map the HOA had flagged during a prior title search. The memo proposed submitting altered boundary documents and waiting until public pushback is minimal before fencing off the land permanently. There were bullet points, a timeline, even a projected cost analysis for replacing my steel gate with a decorative archway. I leaned back in the chair, stunned. They were planning to steal the land outright. Herrera nodded. "That's not the worst part. We found a draft letter, unsigned but clearly authored by Wanda, addressed to the county zoning board. It claims your field had fallen into public disuse and that the original property lines were improperly recorded upon subdivision. If that had been submitted and somehow slipped past review, they could have forced a reassessment and claimed right of use. Except none of that's true. Exactly. But forging land records and submitting them to a government agency, that's a felony, multiple actually. I rubbed my jaw. You charging them? The DA's office is preparing indictments as we speak. There's enough here for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted land theft, and falsifying government documents. We're also looping in the county assessor's office for their own internal review. If any staff member helped them, it could get even uglier. I left the building with a signed statement and a list of pending charges that read like a criminal law syllabus. The case was going public within the week, and when it did, it changed everything. By the following Monday, the local paper ran a front-page story titled, "HOA Scandal Deepens, Officials Charged in Land Theft Scheme." Wanda's photo was dead center, taken as she left her home in handcuffs that morning. Frank and Tracy were arrested later that afternoon. The county prosecutor held a press conference confirming the charges and stated that more arrests were possible depending on who had knowledge of the scheme. The neighborhood was eerily quiet that evening. No one was out walking their dogs, no one trimming hedges or rolling trash bins to the curb. Just silence and the occasional car slowing down in front of Wanda's house, its windows rolled up, occupants whispering behind glass. The interim board, our board, called a community meeting at the elementary school gymnasium, a neutral space where everyone could sit without feeling like they were stepping onto enemy turf. Nearly every homeowner showed up. Some sat stiffly with arms crossed. Others looked guilty, like they'd voted for Wanda out of convenience and now regretted it. "I want to be very clear," I said as I stepped up to the microphone. "This board will never operate in secrecy. We will never weaponize bylaws. And we will never, ever attempt to take what doesn't belong to us." Dana spoke next, unveiling a new transparency policy that included open access to all meeting minutes, a publicly posted budget, and rotating committee seats to keep power from concentrating again. Arjun followed with a motion to cap fines and require third-party mediation before any violation letters could be issued. The room broke into applause, not loud or rowdy, but grateful, controlled, like people were finally breathing easier. Afterward, a man I'd never spoken to approached me. He was in his 70s, wore a Vietnam veteran's cap, and had a limp. "I've lived here 32 years, he said quietly, "and I've never seen anyone stand up to them like that. They tried to fine me once because my service flag was 3 inches too low. I told him to go to hell." I smiled. "Wish I'd been there to see it." "Won't have to wish anymore," he said, clapping my shoulder. "You're the reason it's gonna change." The next morning, the county zoning board issued a statement confirming that no land reclassification had ever been approved, and that any attempt to do so using false documents would be met with full criminal prosecution. That same week, the HOA's insurance provider dropped coverage for all former board members under investigation, citing breach of ethical conduct. We scheduled a vote to strip Wanda, Frank, and Tracy of all remaining powers and privileges. It passed with 91% approval. Their names were removed from all official documents and websites. Their email accounts were shut down. Their access to community systems revoked. For the first time in years, there was no king or queen of the neighborhood, just residents. In the weeks that followed, we set up a rotating volunteer patrol not for enforcement, but to assist elderly neighbors with maintenance, check in on folks recovering from surgery, and help new homeowners understand the community guidelines. Dana even spearheaded a mentorship program for high schoolers, pairing them with retired professionals to learn trades like plumbing, woodworking, and gardening. The field behind my house stayed quiet. The lock stayed intact. No more folding chairs. No more clipboards. One afternoon, I saw Leo teaching his youngest how to pitch a tent out there. I waved from the porch, and he gave a quick nod before returning to the stakes. People started using the park again, the real one, not my field. The reseeding had taken root, and the new benches were finally installed. No one needed a permit to gather. No one was fined for bringing a grill. But the real victory came in late spring when we received word from the county court. Wanda had taken a plea deal fraud, conspiracy, and falsifying legal documents. She'd agreed to restitution, a public apology letter, and 5 years probation with a ban from holding any HOA or civic office. Frank faced a separate trial for financial misconduct, and Tracy's charges were pending, though her legal team was reportedly negotiating. The apology letter arrived 2 weeks later. It was typed, formal, and clearly reviewed by a lawyer. But it was signed in ink, and it included a single line that stood out from the legal boilerplate. I allowed personal ambition to blind me to the trust placed in me by this community. I accept full responsibility. It was the first honest thing I'd seen come from her. We posted it in the community center next to a photo of the new board and a framed copy of the transparency pledge we'd all signed. People stopped to read it. Some nodded, some shook their heads. But no one forgot, and that was the point. We didn't just kick out a corrupt board, we built a better one. We didn't just stop a land grab, we created a neighborhood that wouldn't be ruled by fear or manipulation again. The field stayed mine. But the neighborhood, that belonged to everyone now.